Welcome to Growth Gatherings. Here we invite thought leaders to talk about the evolving business trends and take a closer look into their personal life so we can learn from their successes and failures. Today, we are really honored to have Mr. Ali Jaleel. He's the CEO of B Brown Pakistan. He's also leading digital transformation for Asia Pacific at B Brown. Ali is an accomplished leader. His career spans over 3 decades. He worked for all the major tech companies, including HP, Dell, Microsoft, and Apple. And prior to joining B Brown, Ali was the chairman and CEO, Malaysia and South Asia at Philips. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, Ali, tell us about your career. You started with the tech companies and
That's
then you
right.
pivoted to healthcare. So, how has the journey been for you?
It's been a great ride, I mean, honestly speaking, and almost 3 decades now. The first 17 years have been in IT, tech companies, and I was fortunate enough to work for Compaq, which later became HP. I was based in Houston at that time after doing my graduation from the US. Then I was recruited by Microsoft, and they moved me around so many years with Microsoft, followed by Dell when I became the first country director for Pakistan and then South Asia. Finally, moving into Apple, where I was the head for Malaysia and then South Asia. So yes, and then at that point in your career when you're doing when you're holding a C role, it's more about organization, it's more about business than perhaps the industry is not that relevant.
Correct.
And I was approached by Philips. This was back in 2012, and they wanted to have. They were looking for a leadership change at that time, and they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Yeah. So, and the rest, as they say, is history. So it's been 10 years and 10 great years in healthcare for
In
me.
healthcare.
Yes.
No, I think both are great industries. Now, one question that I have, you have worked in North America,
Right.
South Asia, and Asia Pacific, more specifically Malaysia, Singapore.
Right.
What is your learning? If somebody is navigating their career across geographies, what advice would you give them?
There's a saying, harkat mein barkat. I truly believe in that. And every market offers a different sort of experience. It's very enriching because you have cultural experiences, you have experiences of working for the same organization, but how they approach things differently. So, yes, I think people, especially youngsters, they need to be mobile. They need to be open to the idea. It's not easy. And you can do that at the beginning of your career when your responsibilities are not that much. You have more energy. You're very passionate. So it's a great ride. I mean, you get to be in different countries of the world. You get paid for doing something that you enjoy. And it's a very enriching experience. But as you move up the ladder, of course, you cannot really be hopping every few years. You have to stay put. You have bigger responsibilities professionally as well as personally. So I mean, I would recommend anyone who gets the chance to try it out. I mean, it's been a great ride, as I said, and very, very enriching, and you learn so much, and you appreciate so much too.
And any learning that you've had in the last, the countries that you moved around, that now that you reflect, you said, if I knew this earlier, I would have approached it differently.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, actually. And when you work in an international environment, when you work for an MNC, you invariably end up with a multicultural team. And it took me a while to realize that everybody needs to be managed a bit differently, in the sense that, I mean, that's the case anyways, but from a cultural sensitivity point of view. So for example, there are people from, let's say, South Asia, who would, because you're their manager, they will never say no, or they will not opine about anything unless you probe them. Then I've had people from Western Europe, from Australia, and they're too direct, sometimes so direct that, I mean, our cultural sensitivities also come into play. And it was a struggle. And I think I did take some missteps perhaps. But once I realized the importance of that, that cultural aspect when you're managing somebody in your team that comes from a different background, it makes things so much easier. And I wish I had figured it out. It didn't take me like, the amount of time it took me. So that's one of the things which I think, and these are learnings. So anyone who's out there listening to this podcast and managing, a national team, I think this would be my advice to them.
And I think today it's easier, relatively easier because of technology, but also I think when people travel, it's
Right.
extremely important start observing people, not just travel for the sake of just
Traveling,
going
yes.
around, but observe people because you're right, there are nuances in the system. So you've been a CEO for mashallah, for a long time.
Right.
And the CEO's role, and I know from an HR perspective, because every time when we are doing succession planning, there's always a question for emerging talent and how do you groom them into CEO's role. So I have a few observations and I like your thoughts. Number one, particularly women, I see less so they are interested in CEO's role, even if they have aspiration, but it's not, I mean, sometimes the direction isn't there. Two, sometimes it's not very clear what kind of critical experiences or learnings we need to provide so they become well-rounded leaders, right? And I know for sure in Pakistan, every time you're doing succession planning for CEO's role, it is sometimes hard to find well-rounded leaders. Now, and today we also know the world is changing. So, how do you see the role of CEO? Firstly, the role of CEO has evolved, and how do you see going forward? What are the critical expertise required to be an effective CEO?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the first C role which I had was back in 2007, and we're in 2025, right? So it's been 20 years, 2 decades, and I believe there's a lot of change as far as the role is concerned. Well, the fundamentals, of course, of a CEO will never change, right? I mean, there's certain expectations, organizational, P&L, so on and so forth. So those are the core competencies or the core requirements for the job. Now, as time is passing, and if we go back, let's say 30 years or 20 years, the CEOs had their core job scope, but they were not really intimately involved with the business, right? They were there doing relationship building, so on and so forth, or brand building. And then it kind of changed where CEOs were expected to be more hands-on. And that continued. And today, of course, the basic requirement is that a CEO should be responsible for everything, especially the business. They should know on their fingertips of what's going on, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities, so on and so forth. I think what's changing now is, and a lot has to do with innovation and technology. And the pace with which we are now being inundated with so much new things which are coming in. So anyone who is aspiring to be one or who already is one, needs to really embrace technology because there's no running away from it. So that's number one. So I think that's one of the things, especially CEOs from Gen X, my gen, who are still younger than me and still have another 10, 15 years to go. They really need to adopt and embrace.
So that's millennial,
Yes, the millennials.
the after Gen X, yes.
Yeah, so Gen Y is millennials, so we are Gen X. Well, I'm at least Gen X, right? So, and Gen X, so I'm the
Small
earlier Gen X.
okay.
Let me put it this way. So on the latter end of the
Yes.
spectrum, so they need to. So
Yes.
they struggle with it. I think Gen Y is still more open to it. So I think technology is going to
Okay.
change. Is going to change the role on how you do it. That's number one. So that's something that they really need to be on top of. I think the other thing which will definitely be a challenge is now in the next 5 to 10 years, you would have to deal with Gen Ys, Gen Zs, and Gen Alpha,
Gen Alpha.
right? They're going to come in. So that cultural understanding of how all of these different generations behave and what is important for them. And by the way, my PhD is on this subject, so I think I know what I'm talking about, right? So it's about the retention of how do you retain, because retention is very important, right? So I think that's going to be a very big challenge on how the organization structure is going to be. Would there be an office or no, or will there be an office for some or for none, or so these are the challenges, or these are the changes that CEOs will have to be really good at. So that sensitivity towards the thorough of different generations which are working for your organization, and then of course how technology evolves and how that changes your changes the processes, not the job. The job, core job remains the same, but the way to approach it, the process, and all of that. So to me, these are the things which are
which are
important.
critical.
Yeah.
So today, if an aspiring CEO is sitting with you,
Mhm.
where do they start? I know you have mentioned understanding different generation or diversity in the workplace. Secondly, digital transformation. But okay, so what do I do next so that I'm ready?
So you need to understand how everything works. And let's talk about, since you said digital transformation, that's a very interesting point. So I mean, either if you're coming from a digital background or IT background, it's easier for you to sort of understand it. But if you're coming from a non-IT, and most of the industry is non-IT, so you've got to understand what that really entails. And just let me break it down to you at the highest levels. What is digital transformation, right? So it's a buzzword that everybody talks about.
Yeah.
But if you really break it down, there are, I think, I would say there are broadly four types of digital transformation. And they're all intertwined, but the implementation is different and they help the organizations differently. To start off with, you have the transformation of the organization itself, let's say the domain, or they want to go through cloud, so the infrastructure. So that's one digital transformation. There's cultural transformation, which is required. That's a different nuance. There is business model transformation, and then there business process transformation. So anyone who is aspiring to be a C level, even any C level, COO, CEO, really needs to understand this and see where the organization is today and where it needs to be. And again, it's a journey. I mean, so you will, even if you implement everything, you've got to keep upgrading it.
Yes.
So that's why I'm saying technology is your friend. Embrace it, use it, understand it, and because that's going to be a huge requirement. And then, of course, the cultural part, which we spoke about.
And talking about digital transformation, I know you're leading that for Asia Pacific for your organization. And I see this a lot in many organizations. They are either in the middle of digital transformation or starting out the process, but it's difficult to understand, as you're saying, and as a common employee. How are you approaching in your specific organization, and where do you think it's heading?
Yeah, good question. As I said, it's a journey, right? And for big organizations like ours, I mean, just the complexity, as you can imagine, with 70 odd thousand employees, direct presence in 60, 70 countries, and direct presence in total 150 countries of the world. So it's not easy, right? And but first thing is, of course, the infrastructure part could be taken care of by, you have the whole IT, which is doing that. So you have a chief operator, you have a chief information officer. So all of that is taken care of. So they can provide the tools, they can provide the infrastructure. But then the most, I think, critical and the toughest one is the cultural digital transformation. How do you make somebody who's worked all his life or her life, 25 years, using a notebook or collateral, physical collateral, or whatever, right, they're doing? How do you move them to a tablet, right? How do you make them go and use SFDC? How do you go and make them use apps?
Did you say SFDC? What is it?
Oh, okay, sorry. So it's salesforce.com. So, I
Oh,
mean, these
okay.
are,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So Yeah, so how do you get
Yes.
them to use all of this, right?
Yes.
And that's I think is the toughest one. And again, because I mean, you have the younger kids who'll come in, they were born with a tablet in
Yeah.
their hand, right? So it's very easy. So if you ask me what has been one of the challenges, overall, I mean, because I've done digital transformation before in Philips as well, and that has been my experience that getting people to embrace that, especially a certain band, that's tough. Then you have other things which
Yeah. No, I agree because now that when I talk to clients, they often talk about that transformation and the speed, right? Because the world is changing so fast. Technology can definitely enable it, but you've got to really run with it.
right.
And a lot of them feel, and you're right, this is typically people in the middle, if I would say, from an HR perspective, where they feel things are getting stuck. Now, nobody's doing it intentionally, but
Right.
how do you sort of create that sense of um, ownership but urgency around it, I think
Right.
is a major one. Okay, interesting. Now, I'm sure you get in touch with the graduates, management trainees, and firstly, if they are starting out their career, or we talk about modern day career, what advice do you typically give them, and what is the trend you're seeing? Because a lot of people want to have their own startup, or do they want a conventional corporate 9 to 5 career? What are you seeing in your advice?
I think depends on the background, honestly, right? Because we come across a plethora of internees and MTOs, and we go and recruit from the top schools, and so and family backgrounds make a huge difference. So there's certain strata which is very risk averse, so they would want to get into a good MNC and develop a career.
Security,
So, yeah,
stability.
absolutely. Then certain backgrounds, these kids, first they have more exposure, to be honest, and they want to do their own thing, and my advice is, I mean, they both have their pros and cons. Who's wanting to have a career, let's say, in a nice multinational, or a career in multiple multinationals, sort of like my projection. So one, they need to be hardworking, they need to be focused, and they need to be patient. So be original, be patient, be hardworking, and good things will happen. Okay, and there are no shortcuts. So you've got to really put in the effort and learn everything, and don't worry about the com part. I know it's hard for kids, but really, I mean, eventually, if you're good at what you do, I mean, you're going to be making a good living for yourself. So that's that path. And to get somebody with that mindset to be an entrepreneur, I don't think it's going to work out very well for them. So when it comes to entrepreneurs or someone who has all these ideas, I mean, it's good to have ideas. And now with VCs, and there's so many VCs around, like, local and global and what have you, regional. So if you have a good idea, most likely you will find somebody to bankroll it. The challenge is, just because you have a good idea and you're technically savvy, will not make you a good business person, perhaps, right? And that's where a lot of startups, not just in Pakistan, in general, when you see they start well, and we've had some failures, big ones as well, without naming them here, where they've gotten the money and what have you, but the way that they ran it is because they just didn't know how to run a business. So running a P&L is very different than having a great idea and being able to like build an app and like, which is going to change the world. So that's the area where you have to actually, engage professionals. So you need to end up having a team, and this is my advice to these youngsters. And I mean, we've got to keep the ego part aside. If you have a great idea, if you have a VC who is willing to back you, you've got to have a professional team, and listen to the people who know how to run a business, and they should listen to you. And now I think a lot of VCs themselves make sure that there is somebody who at the helm who can keep the ship steady. And in the US as well, some of the very successful ones that you see, they are not necessarily holding the CEO role. So I think that would be my advice to them. Have a good idea, you have backing, great. Make sure that you have experienced people who have the same wavelength as yours to run the business, run the business for you, and you go and do what you are really good at.
I completely agree because I've also switched from corporate, and for corporate, I think patience absolutely, and your ability to follow. I think when you join an organization, there's already a structure, framework, and how flexible you are to adapt to it. I think
Right.
is key.
Processes, yes, yes.
On the entrepreneur side, I think what is important is the flexibility, resilience, and avoiding that burnout because you can't do everything. So, talking about young leaders or young graduates entering the workforce, what is one piece of advice you would give to individuals joining the digital economy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question again. I mean, the economy is getting more and more digitized, the processes, so on and so forth. Uh, so one, of course, technology, as I keep saying, is very important, and one should embrace it and use it for um, for your benefit, for enhancing your performance. However, they need to make sure that there is no over reliance, okay, because not every answer is in Chat GPT or Google or whatever else is out there. Yes, these are tools that should help you in your job, okay, but the IP needs to come from you, and there is something intrinsic, what your the gut experience, so you have to. Chat GPT will not give you that. What is your gut telling you? What is your instinct telling you? Okay, and also, interestingly, lately now they've done this research. Anyone who's using these apps, they're not using 70% or they're using 70% less of their neural networks.
Yes.
So they don't retain that information because it's not original. So be original, okay? Use this technology for your benefit and don't have over reliance because you've got to learn from bottom up. And that would be my advice to anyone who is joining now or will join in the future.
Yeah, and I think very true because those kind of learnings they stay with you because of
Yes.
course you make mistakes and then you correct yourself. Before we move on to the last segment, I'd like to know a little bit about your doctorate because it was on business management. Tell us what was it about, the key findings and key themes, and how do you see it in the modern day business?
Yeah, well, so I did my PhD recently, not very long ago, and one of the reasons was that eventually I want to get into academia with all this experience. I want to give back, and I think I've always been passionate about education, and so so my PhD was about retention of Gen Y in multinationals, specifically in Malaysia, because when I was in Malaysia, that's when I did my PhD. And the reason why I chose this topic is, as you mentioned, that I used to be the chair and CEO of Philips, and we had a huge organization. And I'll sit with HR, and we'd go through, quarterly reviews or sometimes monthly reviews, and turnover. So turnover was important for us, and it's very important for a CEO. And I saw a trend where, a lot of youngsters would come in, stay with us for a few years, and then they leave. And it turned out later on that it was an industry issue because when I was part of different associations and everybody was complaining about the same thing. So that got me thinking that what can we do, because I mean, being in HR, a person starts getting productive after a year and a half or 2 years, and that's when employers make all the investments in
Yes.
somebody that you induct.
Yes.
And if they leave after 2 years, all of your ROI somebody else is getting.
Is getting.
So that is what got me thinking, and that's why I chose this topic. And And then, the factors that I looked at, there was no study specifically for Malaysia, but there were some studies from other parts, and PhD is all about that. You take the work of what others have done, and then you build upon it, and then others will build upon your work. So I looked at different factors. So one was work-life balance, one was work environment, one was compensation, one was CSR. Which else? There was one other factor that I looked at, which was training and development. Yeah, so these were the five factors. And what you try to do is, and then you put different models and you go out and ask, depending on your sample size. So my sample size was in excess of 400 Gen Y employees, which were at different stages of their careers within MNCs, on what is important. What should an organization be doing to keep them loyal? And it's very interesting, CSR was very important. Training and development was high correlation. Work-life balance and work environment were important, but not as strong of a correlation as it was for CSR and training and development. And compensation was not part of it. I was surprised. And then I thought about it and then I made sense because they're already in an MNC and they know that if they switch, they would get something similar, or we are paying them, whichever organization, therefore they are paying them as per the market. So, and the challenge was that, you had Gen X managing Gen Ys, and our style is very different on how we were managed by baby boomers. And now you have Gen Y who has work environment. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, that you think we cared whether, we have ACs and CSR, like, what the company stood for. Yeah, it's what is the value and the vision and mission statement. So these were things which came as a surprise to me, some of them at least. So then, interestingly, I presented once I defended my dissertation. My president asked me to present to APAC. I was in Philips at that time, and I presented it, and then I worked with the APAC HR head to actually come up with policies and procedures within the organization that cater to these needs. And because, who do we train? Oh, this is our talent, or this is our leader. And these are people who have been with the company 5 years, 10 years, what have you. So these kids who come in, their attention span may not be as long as it was ours, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's just different generation that processes things differently. So, we started then. We started training these kids when they came in. We started moving them around because that was important for them. So, that doesn't mean that nobody left us, but if we were able to, and we were able to, over time, then you get the results. To retain people for longer. So if we can keep somebody for 5 years rather than 2 years, that makes a huge difference.
It does. And what they say in HR, if somebody stays for more than 8 years in one role, then from an ROI perspective, the value diminishes. So you're absolutely right. The first 2 years company invest, then the employee sort of
Gives back.
And then after 8 years in the same role, then that it's the time for the employee to move on, because otherwise the value diminishes, or they stop thinking creatively. I don't know if we can generalize it, but that's what the HR study says. Okay, so now the final segment and more fun segment. So we want to know a bit more about you.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, rapid fire round. So are you a morning person or a late night person?
Morning.
Morning.
Yes.
So what time do you start your first meeting?
Well, it depends on, in Pakistan,
I was just going to
our regional boss, so my meetings start really early.
Yes.
They could be as early as 6 o'clock.
Yeah, 6 o'clock in the morning.
But in Pakistan, I've realized not to start any meeting before 9:30. So yes.
Yeah.
But my meetings start early, so I'm a morning
Okay, and 9:30 you get audience?
9:30, I think they've realized that 9:30 is the furthest I can push them. I mean, beyond that, it's not acceptable
It's
to
not
me. Yes.
acceptable. First job you ever had?
It's interesting. I started as a lecturer after finishing my studies, came back to Pakistan and started lecturing. There's this institute called FAST
Yeah,
ICS.
yeah.
It used to be BCCI FAST at that
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
right? So they were looking for somebody to teach digital design and logic, and for their undergrads, and then for their grad students, they were looking for applied statistics. I have an engineering degree, so I ended up teaching there for about 6 months before I came on the commercial side. And interestingly, I still have some of my students who were with me there. I met them in Microsoft. They were picked up from Fast ICS,
Yes.
and they were in Seattle and Redmond. And when I joined Microsoft in Redmond, ended up meeting three, four of them, and they were the smartest of the lot.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great institute, and hence the
Yeah.
doctorate, and hence your sort of desire at some
Yes,
stage to go
yes.
back to
It's very,
academia.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's very fulfilling.
So coffee or tea?
Tea in the morning,
Tea.
yes.
And
Then
is it
one.
like doodh patti tea or is it tea bag tea?
No, it's dam wali chai separate.
Separate damwali
Yeah,
chai.
yeah.
Okay. A tech gadget you're obsessed with.
Unfortunately, my phone, and it gets me a lot of trouble with
And
my
we all
wife.
are.
Yes, yes. So,
And if you could swap jobs for a week with anyone in the world, who would it be?
interesting. Well, it will be somebody who clocks in at a certain time, clocks out, requires minimum skill set. Okay, um, does not take any work home. So maybe a parking lot attendant or
And
some
no
sort.
decision
No
required.
decision making. Yes, zero. So I come in, I clock in. If I have to interact with people, fine.
Huh.
And then I clock out, and that's it.
So not happening in this life. I don't see it.
I don't believe. I think I've passed that stage now,
Yes,
unfortunately. Yes.
but good. If your career was a movie, what would be the title of that movie?
Well, there's an old movie, A Wonderful Life. I think that's what it'll
So
be.
I haven't seen that movie. Tell me about that movie.
So it's about a person who is contemplating ending his existence, and then he starts thinking about how life would be if he wasn't there, or the lives that he has touched, or the people who are dependent on him. So it's an old one. It's black and white. I don't know if people have the stomach to watch it in this day and age, but yeah, it had substance, and it talks about, I mean, all the good things that we have, which we should be appreciating rather than looking at. And life has been honestly great. It's been a
That's really
great
nice.
experience for me.
And I have a final question because you've lived in the US, Malaysia, Singapore, then relocating back to Pakistan, personal reasons, but again, relocating and running a company. Um, Obviously, we see a lot of people who want to move out of Pakistan, but then there are people who want to come back. What are the tips that you'll share or your learnings if they are looking to move back to Pakistan? How can they prepare themselves and their family? And I believe your wife, she's not Pakistani and she's doing really well. I think she has her own business here now.
Right, right, yeah.
So, yeah, what advice would you give?
Look, I mean, it's not an easy decision, and there are pros and cons. So first, I think as a family, you need to be committed because it is going to test you. Pakistan tests you, right? And Karachi tests you even more. So if you're from Karachi, and then you know what's coming. When if you don't know what's coming, then it becomes hard, like it was for my wife. I mean, and she's like, "How bad could it be?" I said, "Oh," or she wanted me to give her examples. I said, "I cannot. You've got to live through those experiences, and then you'll know." And she learned them.
Yeah.
So one is, so these are perhaps the things that are tough. But then the flip side of it is the interactions with your own people. You can relate. Honestly speaking, I've worked everywhere and I've had great teams and wonderful people that I've worked with and worked for. However, there have been times when there was a bit of a challenge relating to perhaps the issues that they had because they're different, right? Here you can relate to the issues that people have, and I mean, I would try to resolve the issues of my other teams as well in my prior roles. But here I knew where they're
Yeah.
coming from, and not just work wise, even otherwise, right? So, and I think if you come in and you bring positivity, it's needed. I think way too many people have left, and we keep losing good people. So if anyone is coming back, I wish them very well, and it's going to take them at least a year to settle. After that, things will not change, but they'll be used to them. However, they can bring about a positive,
Yeah.
perhaps,
Yeah, no, I
change. Yeah.
quite like Karachi. I mean, it's mad, but I love it.
Yes.
And of course, any relocation has its own challenges. But I think once you come back, you're right. The first and foremost is the mindset that you start working on before you start looking for an apartment
Yeah.
and where you want to live, because then it's easier from there. Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you
My
for your
pleasure.
time.
My
It's been
pleasure.
a pleasure having you with us.
Yes. Always a pleasure. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Yes.